What if you could pull off the freeway into a town where the 1960s never really ended? Where the main street still has a family-run hardware store, the diner serves the same blue plate special it has served for 50 years, and the person behind the counter already knows whether you take cream in your coffee by your third visit. Here is the thing. While Los Angeles tears down mid-century bungalows for another luxury mixed-use development, and San Francisco neighborhoods become unrecognizable every few years, there are places in this state that look almost exactly like they did when your grandparents were raising a family. We're not talking about Disneyland or Knott's Berry Farm or any place with a ticket booth and a gift shop exit. We are talking about real, functioning communities where people still do business on trust, where the feed store owner remembers your father's account number from memory, and where the nearest Whole Foods might be 90 minutes away, and that is considered a perfectly reasonable commute to avoid. These are 12 California towns that somehow slipped through the cracks of the most aggressive development economy in American history. Walking through them feels like finding a photograph tucked inside a book you forgot you owned. We are starting in the Central Valley because if you want to understand what small-town California looked like in 1962, you need to drive past the orchards and the irrigation canals until the strip malls stop. Coalinga sits in Fresno County, roughly 200 kilometers from both San Francisco and Los Angeles. It is not on the way to anything unless the thing you are going to is Coalinga. The population is 17,000 in the city proper, but the old downtown district serves a community not much changed in spirit or structure from its mid-century peak. Elm Avenue, the historic commercial corridor, still carries the bones of a town built for working people. The Harris Ranch nearby is one of the largest cattle operations in the United States. Real ranchers buy real equipment from real suppliers who have occupied the same storefronts since their fathers did. The saddle maker on the corner has been resoling boots for the same ranch families for 40 years, and his waiting list runs 3 months long. That kind of continuity does not appear on Yelp. Interstate 5 runs nearby, but it does not pass through the old town centre. The agricultural economy kept the floor from falling out when other industries retreated. The feed stores, the co-op, and the small-scale service economy surrounding a cattle and almond region are not glamorous, and they do not attract venture capital, and that is precisely why they are still there. What do you gain? Affordable housing by California standards, which in this state is a meaningful statement. Real connection to agricultural cycles. A community where neighbors have lived on the same property for 3 generations. What do you lose? Career diversity. Medical specialists require driving to Fresno. The social calendar is not crowded. But for farmers, retirees, remote workers, or anyone who grew up in the valley and wants to return to something recognizable, Coalinga's old bones offer more than most places in this state are willing to preserve. Cambria, on the San Luis Obispo County coast, proves you do not need to be bypassed to be preserved. The population is approximately 6,000, and it sits directly on Highway 1. That is the counterintuitive part. Most preserved towns survived because the highway missed them. Cambria sits on one of California's most famous roads, and it still looks like a working artists' colony from 1970. The east and west villages are lined with galleries, independent bookshops, and original commercial buildings not converted into chain restaurants. The pine forest creates a microclimate that discourages sprawl. Local water restrictions, maintained aggressively by a community that understood what unrestricted growth would mean, effectively capped development for decades. The town council voted 3 separate times to reaffirm those restrictions when development pressure mounted. What looks like preservation was partly the result of deliberate civic choice made by people who understood exactly what they stood to lose and voted accordingly. What makes Cambria genuinely surreal is the combination of extreme natural beauty, an active artistic community, and a Highway 1 address that should, by all economic logic, have turned this into a Carmel replica. Instead, it remains slightly rough-edged, genuinely eccentric, and priced just high enough to exclude the mass market. The gallery owners know their regulars. The coffee is not from a chain. The farmers market operates on terms that assume basic human decency. The threat is real. The water restriction that saved Cambria from overdevelopment also prevents housing supply from meeting demand. The artists who shaped the town's identity are aging. The question is whether their successors can afford to take their place. Now let us discuss something completely different. Bodie in Mono County has 0 permanent residents. It is 480 kilometers from Los Angeles. The last 13 kilometers of road are unpaved, and in winter they are closed entirely. Bodie is a ghost town, but not in the theme park sense. It is a California State Historic Park, maintained in what park managers officially call arrested decay, preserving buildings by preventing further deterioration without restoring them to a false original condition. Bodie reached 10,000 people in 1879 with 60 saloons and a reputation as the most violent mining camp in the West. Then the ore played out and the town froze. Literally froze. The elevation is over 2,600 meters, and the winters are brutal enough that remaining residents simply left, one household at a time, leaving furniture, dishes, and storefronts exactly as they stood. The last full-time resident left in the 1940s. A child's shoe still sits on a shelf in one of the houses. A medicine bottle stands open on a kitchen counter. No one moved any of it. There was no one left to move it. What you gain from visiting Bodie is something almost impossible to find in California. Unmediated contact with what a place actually was. No interpretive gift shop aesthetic. No actor in period costume. Just buildings standing in high desert silence, holding the objects of lives that ended without ceremony. Walking through feels less like tourism and more like trespassing on memory. Bodie belongs on this list because the decision to arrest its decay, rather than restore or abandon it, represents a philosophy about preservation. The other towns here would do well to study. Ferndale, Humboldt County. Population 1,371. This village in the Eel River Valley, about 400 kilometers north of San Francisco, is one of the most intact Victorian commercial streetscapes in the American West and has been a California historical landmark since 1981. Ferndale was founded as a dairy farming community in the 1850s. The farms made merchants wealthy enough to build substantial Victorian buildings in the 1880s and the 1890s. Then the economy shifted, the young people left, and the buildings sat. Artists discovered cheap Victorian housing in the 1960s and the 1970s, moved into the ornate houses and commercial spaces, and stayed. The result is something genuinely strange. Working dairy farms on the valley floor, Victorian architecture on the hill streets, and a community of sculptors and painters occupying the commercial district. The butcher and the ceramicist have shared the same block for 30 years and seem to find this arrangement perfectly natural. Neither has ever suggested the other should leave. The Humboldt County Fair has run continuously in Ferndale since 1896. The kinetic sculpture race sends human-powered art machines from Arcata to Ferndale each Memorial Day weekend. The farms did not become decorative. The artists did not sanitize the farming culture. Both exist simultaneously in a town with essentially no economic reason to still be this intact. The population is aging and the year-round economy is fragile, but the combination of agricultural stability and artistic community has produced something more sustainable than either element would be alone. Time to discuss the strangest identity situation in California's small-town history. Solvang, Santa Barbara County. Population 6,200, about 230 kilometers from Los Angeles. Founded in 1911 by Danish-American educators who wanted to establish a Danish folk school on the California coast, the town built Danish-style architecture and continued Danish cultural traditions. Decades later, California's tourism economy discovered them and turned what was a sincere immigrant community into the most aggressively themed small town in the American West. There is now a replica of Copenhagen's Round Tower. Businesses have names designed to signal Danish heritage to visitors who could not identify Denmark on a map. Every weekend in summer, the sidewalks fill with tourists eating æbleskiver and photographing windmills built specifically so that tourists could photograph them. Here is what is genuinely strange. Beneath the tourism layer, Solvang remains a completely authentic Danish-American community. The Lutheran Church still holds services. Danish is still spoken at family gatherings. grandchildren who answer in English still understand what their grandparents are saying. The Elverhoj Museum documents the real founding story, not the theme park version. One woman whose grandparents were among the founders described it plainly. "The tourists come for the windmills," she said. "We were here before the windmills were built for the tourists." The real community events are the church suppers and the Danish Days Festival, which actually commemorates the founding rather than performing it. It is California at its most layered, a completely sincere immigrant community wearing a tourism costume for economic reasons, while continuing to function with genuine cultural purpose underneath. Vernon, Los Angeles County. Population 112 people. It has maintained city status since 1905, making it the only exclusively industrial city in the western United States. It has stubbornly refused to dissolve or amalgamate with Los Angeles, despite being completely surrounded by it for over a century. Vernon has no schools, no parks, and no residential neighborhoods in any meaningful way. The 112 residents are largely employees of city-owned facilities or relatives of city officials, which has generated its share of political controversy. The city's budget runs on industrial tax revenue from slaughterhouses, cold storage facilities, and light manufacturing that have occupied the same blocks since the 1920s. Walking through Vernon is genuinely disorienting. You are 15 minutes from downtown Los Angeles, surrounded by early 20th century industrial architecture, and there is almost no one on the street. The loading docks are active, the refrigeration units hum. 18-wheelers idle at the curb waiting for shifts to change. But the sidewalks belong to no one. It feels less like a city and more like an operating museum of industrial California, staffed entirely by forklifts. Vernon's political structure has been challenged repeatedly on the grounds that a city of 112 people cannot meaningfully hold democratic elections. A 2011 state attempt to dissolve it failed. The city survives on industrial tax revenue and institutional stubbornness in equal measure. The industrial architecture represents a layer of California's urban history disappearing everywhere else. That stubbornness, holding city status for over a century despite every practical argument against it, is the most Californian thing about it. Randsburg, in the Mojave Desert near the Kern County line. Population 69. It sits about 220 kilometers northeast of Los Angeles. Between 1895 and the 1940s, the Randsburg mining district produced gold, silver, and tungsten in quantities that funded banks and built proper commercial buildings in a desert receiving less than 15 centimeters of rain annually. The population reached several thousand at peak. Then the economically recoverable ore was gone, a 95% population collapse, and then stillness for 80 years. The original commercial buildings remain. The White House Saloon has operated since 1897 in a building not substantially altered. The general store still sells goods across a counter that miners once leaned against, and the owner will tell you the history of every photograph on the wall without being asked, because there are not enough visitors for selectivity to seem rude. On a quiet Sunday, the whole town feels like a stage set waiting for a cast that is never coming back. Local residents include descendants of original mining families. One told me his great-great-grandfather staked claims here in 1896, and the family stayed when the gold ran out because the desert was theirs by then. They still find specimens while digging fence posts. The year-round economy essentially does not exist beyond a small weekend tourism draw from Los Angeles. Young people leave because there is no reason not to. But for retirees seeking absolute quiet, history buffs, or anyone for whom the Mojave represents something other than a thing to cross quickly, Randsburg offers something that cannot be found anywhere closer to a freeway on-ramp. Colusa is in the Sacramento Valley. Its population is 6,000, and it sits on the Sacramento River about 110 kilometers north of Sacramento. It is a working agricultural service center for rice, wheat, and almond operations covering the valley floor. Nothing dramatic happened to freeze Colusa. The town found its scale a century ago and stayed there. No highway bypass, no industry collapse, no artistic discovery. Just a community that kept doing what it had always done, and found that continuity in California is its own form of radical act. The Colusa County Courthouse, built in 1861 and still in active use, is one of the oldest continuously operating courthouses in California. The same building that administered justice during the Civil War still administers it today. The commercial buildings along Market Street are modest, a few blocks of brick storefronts housing agricultural supply businesses and local services for generations. Unremarkable, except for being unchanged. The kind of unchanged that only happens when no one with money decided the place needed improving. A third-generation rice farmer described it simply. His grandfather drove to Colusa to sell rice and buy parts. His father did the same. He does the same. The courthouse was already old when his grandfather was young. Career options beyond agriculture are limited. Young people leave for Sacramento or the Bay Area, but the courthouse provides a reason for the town to exist in institutional memory, preserving something that might otherwise have been absorbed entirely into the anonymous agricultural landscape. Bridgeport, in the Eastern Sierra. Population 575. Mono County's isolated county seat, about 440 kilometers from both Los Angeles and San Francisco. The Bridgeport Valley, ringed by mountains at over 2,000 meters elevation, looks almost exactly as it did when the ranching economy established itself in the 1870s. There are no new subdivisions on the valley floor because the valley floor belongs to ranches that predate the state's water wars, and the ranches have no intention of selling to anyone who does not understand what they are buying. Mark Twain traveled through this country and wrote about it in Roughing It, describing a landscape of violent beauty and complete indifference to human ambition. His words still fit. The Mono Lake Committee won one of the most consequential environmental legal battles in American history against Los Angeles' water diversions, transforming Western water law. The Bridgeport Courthouse, built in 1880, still operates as an active county seat. The same families who filed homestead claims here in the 1880s still hold property in the valley. One rancher whose family has grazed cattle in the valley since 1889 described the isolation as a feature. The mountains, she said, keep out everything that would change things. The economy barely supports itself on ranching, fishing tourism, and county administration. Who thrives here? Ranchers, fly fishermen, writers seeking altitude and silence. Who would struggle? Everyone whose work requires a city. The Eastern Sierra preserved Bridgeport not through deliberate decision, but through the simple force of geography that California has never fully tamed. Locke, Sacramento County. The population is approximately 80 people. It sits on the Sacramento Delta, about 60 kilometers south of Sacramento. Locke is the last remaining rural Chinatown in the United States. It was built in 1915 on land that Chinese agricultural laborers leased because they were legally prohibited from owning it. Chinese laborers built the levee system that made the Sacramento Delta farmable, reclaiming tens of thousands of acres of Tule marsh into some of the most productive agricultural land in California. They were repaid with the Chinese Exclusion Act, land ownership prohibitions, periodic violence, and systematic erasure from the official historical narrative. The wooden false front buildings along Main Street housed restaurants, gambling halls, grocery stores, and social clubs, serving a community deliberately excluded from the economy it had built. The buildings are still standing. The exclusion is still documented. Both facts matter equally, and any honest visit to Locke requires holding both at the same time. At its peak, the population was over 1,500. Now it is 80. The Dai Loi Museum preserves the gambling hall as it stood when it operated. Walking through Locke is not like other towns on this list. The weight of what happened here is present in the architecture in a way impossible to aestheticize away. The buildings require maintenance that the remaining population cannot fund. Locke still has residents, unlike Bodie. That distinction matters enormously, and it is the distinction that makes the question of its future urgent rather than merely historical. Los Alamos, Santa Barbara County. Population approximately 1,400 and quietly growing. This former stagecoach stop in the Santa Ynez Valley went into long decline when the highway bypassed it. The original false front commercial buildings from the 1880s sat mostly empty, cheap enough to ignore and too substantial to demolish. Then the wine industry arrived. The film Sideways brought the region into national consciousness, and young people discovered that Los Alamos offered Victorian commercial buildings at rents that made San Francisco seem like a hallucination. The original buildings now house a wine bar in a former brothel, a French restaurant in a 19th century general store, and antique shops that know exactly what they are selling and to whom. Bell Street has the patina of something real because it is something real. The revival did not manufacture atmosphere. It moved into atmosphere that had been accumulating for 140 years and largely left it alone, which is rarer than it sounds and harder than it looks. But the revival economy's aesthetics tend towards selective memory. The workers who made the valley farmable are not represented in the architecture that survived. The question Los Alamos now faces is not survival, but authenticity under pressure. The buildings that attracted revival were cheap because they were neglected. As they become expensive because they are preserved, the economic logic shifts. Success has already begun to price out the eccentrics and artists who arrive first. The town saved by affordability is discovering that popularity is a different kind of threat than abandonment, and the two require very different responses. Let me end with two examples of what California preservation looks like when it is working. Volcano, Amador County. Population approximately 100 people. The entire town can be observed from the single intersection that constitutes downtown in one unhurried glance. You can walk the complete commercial district in under 5 minutes. In that space is the St. George Hotel. It has operated continuously since 1862 and it still rents rooms. There is also a theatre company producing professional summer performances in a Gold Rush era building that seats fewer than 100 people, and it sells out anyway. The Volcano Pioneer Cemetery holds graves dating to 1851. Volcano was too small to redevelop, too isolated to attract development pressure, and too historically dense to abandon. It simply remained. This is precious. In the exact sense the word implies, rare, fragile, and worth protecting specifically because it cannot be reproduced. The community understands what it is holding and has chosen, generation after generation, to hold it. That choice, repeated quietly and without drama across 170 years, is its own form of heroism. The kind that never makes the news because nothing went wrong. Finally, Trona, San Bernardino County. Population approximately 1,700. This industrial company town on the shores of Seals Lake was built in 1913 to house workers mining the dry lake bed for sodium compounds. The mine still operates. The pinnacles, a field of tufa spires rising from the dry lake bed, look like nothing else on Earth and have been used as a science fiction filming location for decades. They were here millions of years before the mine and will be here long after it. The town was severely damaged by 2 earthquakes in 2019, but continues to function. The school is open, the mine employs workers. The company housing, built in the 19-teens and the 1920s, still houses families. There is no gift shop. There is no craft brewery in a historic building. There is a dry lake bed and a chemical plant and a community that exists because the mineral deposit has not been exhausted. The people who live here are not here for the aesthetic. They are here because the work is here, and that clarity of purpose is its own kind of preservation. Trona belongs on this list because it represents a category of California town that the state's popular self-image tends to exclude, the working industrial community that exists not for lifestyle or heritage, but because something economically necessary has been happening there for over a century, in the same buildings, because that is what the work requires. When the deposit eventually runs out, Trona will face the choice that Bodie and Randsburg faced. The pinnacles will still be there. The company housing will still stand. What will be missing is the reason those buildings were built. So there you have it. 12 California places where time slowed down or stopped entirely. They were preserved for different reasons: agricultural stability, water restrictions, ethnic identity, religious community, mineral geology, or the simple fact that developers could not make the numbers work. They offer different things: affordability, community, historical depth, and a relationship to landscape and labor that the state's coastal economy has largely traded away. And they face different threats: population aging, economic fragility, the end of extraction industries, and the paradox of preservation becoming so appealing that it generates the very development pressure it was meant to resist. If you have lived in any of these places, I would genuinely like to hear about it in the comments. Locals, please correct me if I got details wrong, and if you are considering visiting, go soon. Some of these places exist in their current form because the conditions that preserve them are still holding. Those conditions are not permanent. The geology does not change, the history does not change. But the economics change and the demographics change, and eventually even the most stubbornly preserved place discovers that time was patient enough to wait it out.